Good evening, everyone.
Kavod Harav, how are you?
Baruch Hashem, thank you.
Kavod Harav, we did Yud Bet, Bet Yosef and Shulchan Aruch.
Right. And so we're starting in Gimel. So it says here, כתב רוקח. אם לא קבע מקום להם, כל אחד מברך לעצמו. As we talked about last time, that if it didn't make a place for them, then each one blesses for himself. ואם כיוון המברך להוציאם, והם כיוונו לצאת יצאו. But if they both had the intention to fulfill their obligation with one person, then it worked anyway. וכן יראה מתשובת הרשב"א, so it seems, Rashba says, שיכתוב בסימן רי"ג, I'm going to write this is in chapter 213. Yeah, so what is he saying over here? What he's saying is that even though we said that if they don't really plan to eat together, as one group, they don't really bless together as one group, but if they did anyway, it does work though. That's what he's saying over here. So let's see Shulchan Aruch, how he summarizes that. Right, so it says like this, "Hechad delo kavu makom de'aminan shekol echad mevarech le'atzmo." As we said, right, if they didn't really fix to be together in one place, in kivenam varech le'otziam, but nevertheless, right, if the one who blessed had the intention to fulfill their obligation, and also the others as well had their intention to fulfill their obligation from him. So, it's a two-way street, basically, right? They're both having the same idea. So then it does work anyway, even though that wasn't the original plan. That's it. Okay, so we'll go to the next one. Very short. So now it says the Torah, "Ve'echad mesubin rabim." When you have many, right, people who are dining together, gadol shebekulam motzei, as we said, right, the man, the head of the household, he's the one who's going to break the bread. Ve'im yesh imahem balabait hu motzea. So yeah, so what he's saying over here is like this, that there's two things going on here, right? Which is really, could be the same thing as well. Which is that you have the gadol, right? The one who's bigger than all of them. So in other words, in terms of seniority, he's a senior person there. And then you have also the one who's the host. So the host will, take the leading role and bless for all of them, even though he may not be the biggest person in the bunch in terms of seniority. That's what he means to say, something like that. But after all, he is the host. Okay, so that's what the Torah says, and comes the Beit Yosef and says, "Beresh perek shlosha shachlu." In this perek, right, which is in Brachot Mem Vav Amud Bet, Aminan de Bala Bait Botzea Kadesh Yibatzea Ba'ain Yafa. So he says, right, why did they make this concept that the host should be the one who blesses for everybody? So he says, because we want him to do so in a generous manner. So, meaning that, since it's his bread that they're eating, so, if he's generous about it, he can give them, nice, generous portion to everybody. So he says, since that's the reason, he says, nevertheless, since that's the reason, right? So even if the host is not really the senior, but nevertheless, because of that reason, he should bless. He should be the one who blesses, even though one of the guests is more senior than him, as we said. That's what he's trying to say. Okay, that's pretty clear. So let's take a look at the. There's more here, a little more bit Yosef. The מסובין רבים גדול מקום בצע, כלומר שאין ביניהם בעל הבית, או שכולם בעל הבתים, right? Or it could be, right, that in some cases, the senior person will do it. So what case would that be? So it says with Yosef, talking about a case where there is no host there, or they're all hosts, right? Whatever, right? One or the other. So there, right, then the elder would do it, the senior person there. Ken Katav Rambam, that's what the Rambam says, Perek Zayin, Milchot Brachot, laws of blessings. וגם כן כתבו התוספות בריש פרק שלושה שאכלו. Also says Tosfot in the beginning of this parak at aha the ita hatam regarding that which it says The Rabbi Yochanan Amar Bala Bait Potzea, that Rabbi Yochanan said, right, that the host will break the bread, the Oreach Mevarech, and the guest will bless. Rav Huna Amar Potzea Mevarech. But Rav Huna said, no, the one who breaks the bread is the one who blesses. Teshli Hashev Hanet Terei Lishne, the Rabbi Yochanan. So he says we can reconcile these two languages of Rabbi Yochanan. Kishe Bait Mesivim We're talking about where the host is eating with them. But Botzea, so then as we said, right, he will be the one who breaks the bread and blesses. So then, right, the guest will bless. So you know what he's talking about here? Blessing. He's talking about the Birkat Hamazon, right? The final blessing, after they eat the meal. So we want the guests to do that, to do the Birkat Hamazon. So what's the reason for that? There's also a reason for that as well. The reason is because when he says Birkat Hamazon, the guest, what he'll do is, he'll bless the host in the Birkat Hamazon. So this way, the host will be blessed by the guest, which is the proper way to do things. But then he goes on, but he says, if there is no host there, he's not eating there together with them. Hagadol shebem yaseh motzi. So then what happens is that the senior person there will do the hamotzi. V'gam hu yivarech b'kat hamazon. And he'll also do b'kat hamazon as well. V'chein katav Mordechai sham. That's what the Mordechai says. Okay, good. That's good. So let's go to Shulchan Aruch. Yud Daled. Says Shulchan Aruch, ima mesubim rabim. And if the people who are, the group is large group, at the gadol shebekulam botzeh. So who will bless the senior person there? So says the Ramah here, ve'im hem shavim ve'echad mehem kohen. So he says, what about if they're equal, and then one of them is a kohen, mitzvah liakdimo. So then the mitzvah is to give the honors to the kohen here to do. Ve'im kohen amaretz, but it says if the kohen is amaretz, right, which means he's not learned in Torah. I hope you know what that means. Talmid chacham kodem lo. So then the Talmid chacham becomes before him. Right. So in other words, yeah, this is like a major rule with many of the mitzvot. Most issues is like this, which is that if there's no Talmid chacham there, so then the kohen will take precedence over everybody. But if there is a Talmid chacham, so Talmid chacham comes before the kohen. But if there is somebody there who is both, a Talmid chacham and a kohen, so then he'll come first. He'll take precedence. אלא שהוא פחות מן השני, טוב להקדימו, אבל אין חיוב בדבר. So he says like this, that if you have like a situation like this where, as we said, the Kohen is also Talmid Chacham, but he's not as big as the other guy there, right? So then what happens over there? So says the Rama, it's good to give him precedence, the Kohen. But he says it's not really an obligation. So then he says after that, V'ayin le'el siman reish aleph. Look over there. It says in chapter 201, V'im yesh imahem balabait. So he says, but right, if there is with them the host, who botzia, and then he is the one who blesses. Pafilu im oreach gadol, even if the host is bigger than him, right, in terms of seniority. So it seems like from this language that the host takes precedence over everybody. And this is what the sages wanted because of the issue of, giving the bread with generosity since it's his bread. So let's just make sure we got this straight. Everything is good. Yeah, that's pretty much the story. That's the way it goes. So just to recap, right? So you don't miss anything, right? You got all the details here. So the rule is like this: if you have a group of people dining together, okay, so then the senior person will take precedence over everybody. That's one thing. Um, but right comes the Ramah and says if there's a Kohen there, he'll take precedence. When is that? When they're all equal. There's no senior person there. They're all pretty much the same. So then the Kohen will come first. And if the Kohen is right the Amaretz, so then the Talmid Chacham comes before him. But apparently, right, according to what we said, regardless of all this, if the host is there, right, he'll come before everybody else. This is what the rabbis wanted. But if the host is not there, just a group of people, so then we have the issue of seniority. So let me just see here in the Mishnah Berurah here what it says, because the question is, right, when we talk about seniority, are we talking about age or are we talking about wisdom? Right? That's the question. So let's take a look at what he says about that. Yeah, so Mishnah Berurah right away jumps on this, and says we're talking about wisdom. Oh, right. So in other words, we don't really honor the age over here. It's not a matter of the age really. Like one is 65, the other one is 75. That's not the issue. The issue is the wisdom, right? Who has more Torah? We're not talking about bachelor's degree, right, and master's degree. That's not right. We're not talking about that stuff. We're talking about wisdom of Torah. That's the whole idea. So so when we talk about the senior in this issue, we're always talking about the wisdom and not the age, according to Mishnah Berurah. Makes sense because really, like, what does it really matter? One is 65, one is 67. What does that give you? You've gotten, more social security checks that makes you better? Not really, that's not really the issue there. Okay, good. So I guess we'll go to the next one. Let's see what that's all about. So says the Tur, in ט"ו, ואין המסובין רשאים לטעום עד שיטעום הבוצע. So it says, right, that the, the people who are dining there together are not allowed to taste the bread until the one who broke the bread has tasted first. So what's the reason for that? Because since he's the leader of the group and he's blessing for everybody, so they got to wait for him. He's like, everything hinges on him. So that means that they should not taste the bread until he has done so himself. He's the one who blessed after all. And that makes them permitted to do so as well, once he has done it. That's what the Torah is saying. Makes sense, logical. Okay. So let's see the Bet Yosef here. Beresh Perek Shlosha Shachlu. He brings a source for this, right? Which is in Brachot Mem Zayin Amud Aleph. Katav Rashba, says the Rashba there, Ve'im Tomar, Ve'aminan Be'arve Psachim. But then we say in in Psachim there, Kuf Vav Amud Aleph, Gabe Rav Asher De'ikla Lemechoza, regarding this rabbi, right, Rav Asher. He happened to be in the town of Mechoza. ואמרו לעביד מור קידוש הרבה. Oh, it's a famous story, this story, right? So, he happened to be there, and, this was Shabbat. So, it's a funny kind of thing over there, where, they told this rabbi, Rav Asher, okay, so, time to make Kiddush. So you'll make Kiddush for us, Rabbi. Right? That's what they told him, And they said Kiddush Rabbah. So what does that mean in Aramaic? That means the big Kiddush, the big deal, So it's a funny story there, The story goes that they told him Kiddush Rabbah. He didn't understand what they're talking about. Like a big Kiddush. Like what's so big about it, Like what, the grand Kiddush it is? What is it, So he didn't understand what they were talking about, when they said this. Because I guess, it was their custom to use this terminology, Kiddush Rabbah, big Kiddush. And he was like, "What big kiddush? What, it's just a regular kiddush. What are you talking about big?" So I'll explain to you what that means, right? That this is what we call the kiddush of the morning. When we make on Shabbat morning. After we come home from shul, right, in the morning. So we call that the kiddush that we make kiddush rabbah, the big kiddush, right? So why is it so big? Right? He didn't understand what they were talking about, So the truth is, right, that this name is like a euphemism, It's like, right, because they call it kiddush rabbah, the big kiddush, but the truth is, it's really a small kiddush, just the opposite, right? It's like a little man's kiddush, the little guy. Why is it a little kiddush? What's the reason why? Because there's nothing besides the blessing, right? All you do is you say Baruch atah Hashem Elokeinu melech haolam borei peri hagefen. So just one blessing, a few words, So it's really actually a small kiddush, you know. But as a euphemism, they call it a big guy, the big kiddush, right? Oh, it's a big guy. Like, it's like to make it like to give it honor, even though it's small. So they called it big. So, it's a funny story there that, since this rabbi didn't know what they were talking about, so they told him, yeah, Rabbi, make the big kiddush for us. So he's like, what? Big kiddush? I don't understand what you're talking about. So, he started to improvise, he wasn't sure what to do. I mean, uh, so what does he do, right? He starts like saying the blessing, Baruch atah Hashem Elokeinu melech haolam borei peri hagefen. So once he made the blessing, he wasn't sure, if there's like more stuff to say afterwards. He didn't know what they were talking about. So he's like looking, at them, like after he makes the blessing, like to see, the cue that they're giving him with their eyes, So he understood that the cue now was, to drink it actually. It's over. That's it, the big kiddush, right? One little blessing. So then he realized, oh, okay, now I'm drinking. Okay, yeah. So he improvised it, like faked it, he faked it. Like, whatever. But he didn't know what they were talking about, really. The truth is. It's a funny story there. So whatever, right? We call it Kiddush Rabbah. So uh, it says there, right? Chazie lehu saba de gachin v'shate alma de mesubin rashayin litom. Right. So how do you know, right, that he was supposed to drink at that point? Because he saw one old man there, who started to drink after the blessing. So he says, "Oh, you see, if he's drinking, I'll drink too." There you go, right? Okay, we're good, right? We're good to go. Oh, right. מסובים, רשאי לטעום, קודם שיטעום, המברך, יש לומר דעתם. So he says, right? So now, right, they brought the story and they said, well, you see from the story something interesting, right? Which is that this old man, right, the old timer over there, who was started to drink, he was starting to drink actually before Rav Asher, who was making the kiddush. So that shows you, right, that you're allowed to drink before the main guy makes the kiddush there, before he drinks himself. That's yeah, just the opposite of what we said, right? You got to wait for the head of the household, right? The head honcho there to drink before you drink, or to eat, bread before you eat the bread. Same thing, right? The same concept. Okay, so יש לומר דהתם כשהיה כוס ביד כל אחד ואחד. So he says, no, that case is different. Why? Because since everybody had like a cup in his hand, right? ולא היו צריכים להמתין לכוסו של המברך. So they didn't need to wait for the right cup of the one who blesses. So what he wants to say is like this, right? This rabbi. Who is this rabbi, by the way? Just the Rashba. Okay, it's a Rashba. So anyway, right? As we said, says the Rashba. You know what? In that case, it was okay. Why? Because each one had their own cup, of wine. So then you don't have to wait for the head of the household. But when it comes to, breaking the bread, right? So usually the way it is that, everybody's eating from the same loaf. So you only have one loaf of bread, right? And therefore, you got to wait for the guy to first taste it before you do, because, that's what he blessed on. But if each one has his own loaf of bread, right? So then you don't have to do that. Same thing, right? Just like when each one has their own cup of wine, you don't need to wait. Okay, good. So let's move on. V'achita behedya beRushalmi. That's what it says in Yerushalmi. It says the perek Ketzad Mevarchin over there, also in the brachot. The Kasina Anatam, because it says there, right, that Rabbi Abba B'Shem Rav Mesubim Asurim. So it says right there that the ones who are eating together, as a group, they're forbidden litom to taste the bread, klum achit oman barech, until the head of the household, does to taste first. Rabbi Yoshua ben Levi amar shotim af al pi shelo shata. But this rabbi says no, you're allowed to. You can drink before. Upalig man de amar Rav. So he's arguing with Rav. Two different opinions there. כשהיו כולן זקוקים לכיכר אחד. So that which Rob said, right, that you got to wait, we're talking about when there's only one loaf. Everybody's blessing on that. מה דאמר רבי יהושע ben Levi כשהיו כל אחד מכיכרו. And that which Rabbi Yoshua ben Levi said is referring to the case where, everybody has their own loaf. So really there's no machloket here, right? There's no dispute. It's just talking about two different cases. That's what it really is. וכן כתוב התוספות, that's what's in Tosfot. ורבנו יונה also this rabbi, והראש, right, all these rabbis said the same thing. ואף על פי שכתבו גם כן תירוצים אחרים, and even though they wrote, he says, also other answers to answer this question, this apparent, right, contradiction, whatever you want to call it, פסק רבנו כתירוץ זה. So he says, but nevertheless, Rabbeinu, right, who is the Tur, paskin like this answer, לפי שהוא ביד ירושלמי, why? Because it's written in Yerushalmi like that. כתבו התוספות שכן עשה רבנו שמשון. So he says, right, also this rabbi, רבנו שמשון, also did like that. בחופה אחד שבצע החתן, it says in a certain wedding, right, where the chatan, right, the groom broke the bread, המוציא, והיה בוצע רבנו שמשון הפת שהיה לפניו. So רבנו שמשון didn't wait for that, right, the groom. Why is that? Because he had his own loaf. So he says, I don't have to wait for you, right? I'm independent. So once you finish the blessing, I dig right in. I don't wait for you to taste it. You got your own loaf, I got my own loaf. Okay? ואחר כתבו, okay, that's good. כתבו עוד, they wrote further there, right? והשר מקוצי היה אומר, right? Who wrote this? תוספות, right? That he says, right? This rabbi, we call him right, שר מקוצי. היה אומר, אם בצע ברך, he says like this, that if the person who's blessing, right, broke the bread, ונתן לכל אחד חלקו, and he gave to each one, right, his little piece there, he broke off a piece for everybody, and צריך כל אחד ימתין עד שיטעום המברך. So he says then, they don't have to wait for him anymore, since they all have their own piece of bread at this point. והא דאמינן Hacham, and that which we said here, that they're not allowed to taste it before. That's talking about taking from the loaf that the one who blessed, right, broke. But once he gave to everybody a little piece of bread there, right, so then he says, then there's no problem there. So he said, that's what you got to say. That הבוצע הוא פושט ידו, the one who right broke the bread will spread his hands, תחילה לטבול פיתו, he's going to dip his bread, right, ואם בא לחלוק כבוד לרב, and he's going to, if he's going to give honor, right, he's going to honor the rabbi, Rasha, he can do that, והמאי, והאין המסובין השם איתם. But then we say, right, that they're not allowed to taste before him. ואין נאמר דמינת הטבול לחודי kamar. So he says, don't try to say, right, he's talking about only the one that they dipped. Only that one. אח המברך, achil kodem, but he says the one who blessed will be before. Dein ken, if so, he says, מה כבוד היה זה? What kind of honor was that? אבל לפי מה שפירשתי, ניחא. So he says, but according to what I explained, it comes out good. ויש מפרשים, and some might explain like this, פושט ידו תחילה בקערה. That means he spreads his hand, right, first into the tray, להתחיל באכילה, to start eating, right? Some say it refers to that. Okay, so this is all the language of, apparently it's all the Rashba here. He brings down this whole right, story here. Okay, good. So let's move on. So he says, when Yesh Dat Rambam, what about the opinion of the Rambam? The Perk Zayin, right, in this chapter 7, כדת יש מפרשים שכתב הבוצע הוא פושט ידו תחילה ואוכל. So he holds like the other opinion, right, which we mentioned, the last one, which is that we're talking about the one who broke the bread. He's going to spread his hands, right, first to eat, start eating from the food, the tray, right? רשאים לטעום עד שיטעום המברך. ואין המסועים רשאים לטעום עד שיטעום המברך. So there, right, the ones who are dining with him cannot taste until he tastes. ואם רצה הבוצע, and if the person, the head of the household, wants to, the one who breaks the bread, לחלוק כבוד לרב, if he wants to honor the rabbi, or למי שהוא גדול ממנו, or somebody who's bigger than him, right, and wisdom, whatever, as we said, right, בחוכמה. So always, right, the big guy is the wise guy, right? That's what we're talking about. So he allows him, to take beforehand, right, before him. We can do that. Okay, so that's the Rambam. Adkan b'chen nireh shehu dat Rashba. Rashba also seems to hold that way. Sheperek shlosha she'achlu, because in this perek, which is in Brachot, Hevi Yerushalmi shkatabti b'samuch. He brought the Yerushalmi that we wrote, that we mentioned. Katav alav mikan nishma. So he says, he writes about that from here you learn shim hayu kulam zkukim lekos echad, that if all of them, right, were they're all relying on one cup. In other words, when it comes to the kiddush, right, or kikar or lekikar echad, or one loaf, for the hamotzi, afal pishin natan hambarech lekos, even though, right, the one who blesses, right, gave the cup, rekan shebiad shemesubin. So one more time, what is he saying here? Make sure I get this straight here. So again, right, I'll read this one more time. So he says, Apa pi shenatanam barech lekos rekan, even though the one who blessed, he gave the cup which is empty, right, to the diners, or shenatan lifnehem mikikaro, or he gave before them, right, his loaf, kodem sheitom, before he tastes it. She'en echad mehem rashai litom. He says, but they're not allowed to taste ad sheitom ambarech, until he tastes. Be'aminan tu b'Yushalmi, and we said also in Yushalmi, Rav kad hava katse hava ta'im bismale umaplig bimine. So it says, right, that when Rav would break the bread, he would taste with his left, and then he would do something else, break it, right, with his right hand. So, okay, so whatever. I'm not exactly sure what he means by that in Yerushalmi. Yeah, so in other words, he's saying, right, that this was his custom in terms of the way he did it, right? He would taste with the left hand but break it with his right hand. Okay, today we don't have this custom, never heard of this before. What he brings from the Yerushalmi here. But anyway, so it says, right, the brings a conclusion here, the Bet Yosef. Im kol echad ochel mikikaro rashad itom. So the rule is like this, right? Halachically speaking, if each one is eating from his own loaf, as we said, right? So then, right, let me just explain to you, right? How does this work? We have the head of the household, right? The big guy, right? Whatever, or the host, whatever it is, right? He's the one who's making the blessing for everybody, But in this scenario, what we have is, each one has like a little loaf there for himself, right? And let's say, it's like a big roll, everybody's got a roll, a big roll, to eat for himself, right? So each one is like a separate loaf. That's pretty much what it is. So then, in a case like that, there's no problem, to taste it before the head of the household who blessed. Once he has finished the blessing, even though he hasn't actually tasted it yet, since I have my own loaf, I can taste it before him. That's what we're saying. Let's say, like instead of the Yerushalmi says, about im hayuz cooking the kikar achad. But if they have only one loaf, right, for everybody, and then it's in the hands of the host, whatever, right, the big guy, right? אף על פי שנתן הבוצע לפני כל אחד ואחד ואינו רשאים לטעום. So even though he gave, to each one like a little piece, right, after he blessed, nevertheless, right, in a case like that, they're not allowed to taste until he tastes. עד שיטעום בוצע. וכדברי הרשב"א, like the Rashba said. וכדמשמע דברי הרמב"ם, like also implies the Rambam like that. ויש מפרשים, right, and also, right, the second opinion there. So that's the way we do it. He says, okay, good, sounds good. So then he says one more little thing here. ואם הוא שבת אינם רשאים לטעום קודם, אלא אם כן יהיה לפני כל אחד right, לחם משנה. Oh, so now, right, he gets to the issue of Shabbat, right? Shabbat is a little bit different, right? What is the difference between Shabbat and weekday? So the obvious difference is like this, that on Shabbat we're blessing on two, right, loaves, and on a weekday we're blessing only on one. That's what we call lechem mishnah, right? So therefore, since you need two loaves, right, for Shabbat, so he says the only way this will work, on Shabbat is that each one should have his own two loaves of bread, right, lechem mishnah. Otherwise, basically we're relying on the head of the household, for everybody. So then, they would have to wait, as we said, right? So that's the difference, right? On Shabbat, you need two loaves, while on the weekday you can rely just on one loaf. That's good enough. That's it. So it says Bet Yosef, right? What's the source for this? Ken Katab Shama Rosh. The Rosh says this, right? And, it's all logical, pretty much. It's okay. So, okay, great. So let's do the Shulchan Aruch. Let's see what we got here. So says Shulchan Aruch, "Ena mesubin Hashem yitom ad shitom habotzeh." Right? As we said, the rule is that everybody else there, in the group there, is not allowed to taste from the bread unless the head of the household has first tasted. ואם כל אחד אוכל מכיכרו ואין כולם זקוקים לכיכר שביד הבוצע. But then he says like this, right, as we mentioned before, that if each one has their own loaf, right, then they don't have to, they don't need the bread from the head of the household. They have their own. Rashayim litom kodem. So then they can taste before. So as we already said, right, what does that mean before? It means, after he has finished the blessing, because obviously you can't eat before, he blessed because, you need to have the blessing beforehand. Ve'imhu Shabbat, so then, right, we get to Shabbat, then it's a different story a little bit, right? As we said, so then, right, in order to do this, you need that everybody should have two loaves, right? Because on Shabbat you need two. חוץ ממה שלפני הבוצע, right? Besides the one which is in front of the head of the household. ואז יהיו רשאים לטעום קודם משבוצע. So then they could also taste before, right, the head of the household, the one who broke the bread. Okay, very good. So if you have any questions, let me know. Otherwise, we'll move on. Maybe we'll try one more. So let's go to Chet Vav. So it says Tet Vav, like in the tour, אין הבוצע רשאי לבצוע עד שיכלה אמן מפני רוב העונים. Right. So this is also an interesting thing, which is that the head of the household, right, the one who broke the bread, is not allowed to break it until, right, the ones the group there has everybody has said amen. At least most of the people have said amen. He's got to wait until that time, and then once they said amen, now right he can break the bread and taste it, but he shouldn't do so beforehand. That's what he's saying. So in Judaism, this is what we call table manners. This kind of stuff, right? Whatever. So it says Bet Yosef regarding that, Gam ze bepek shlosha she'achlu, right? It's also there in the Gemara there in Brachot. כתוב באורחות חיים, it says in אורחות חיים, שאין הבוצע רשאי לטעום עד שיכלה אמן בפי רוב הצימסורים. As we said, right, that they have to wait till most of the people said amen. לפי שעונה אמן כמברך. So why is that? So he says the reason is because the one who answers amen is like also making a blessing. So in other words, the blessing isn't really over yet until they've said amen. It's a part of the process here. You know? So that's why you got to wait till that has been done. שאין הבוצע רשאי לטעום עד שיכלה אמן מפי רוב המסובים, לפי שעונה אמן כמברך, וכתב מערי בן חביב. So as this rabbi says, הטעם שאמר מפי רוב ולפי שכל המעריך באמן יותר מדי, אינו אלא טועה. אם כך לא בעניין מפי כולם. So now he explains, right, this rabbi, we just said, right, you got to wait till most of the people have said amen. So the question is, okay, so then wait till all of them have said amen. Why most? Yeah, what's that all about? So he says, you know why? Because the one who says amen like too long elongates it too much. So he says, he's mistaken, right? Like it says in the Gemara there in Brachot. So therefore, we don't have to wait for people like that, since they're mistaken anyway. Their behavior is erroneous. So we don't have to wait for them, We don't respect them so much. So again, right, what are we saying over here? That according to this, to say amen too long is not a good thing, it's not praiseworthy at all. So what does it mean that it's too long? I'll give you an example, right? He says like amen, like it's one of those things, like it sounds like it's reverberating all from the walls, like too much, You don't have to go that long. That's what he's saying. So, right, what do we see from there? In the Gemara, it says there that don't say amen too short. Don't swallow it. Like, amen. Like just very very short. That's also not respectful. But also too long is also not good. Like some kind of stretching it out like some kind of a rubber band. Elastic. You make it into elastic there. Too much. It's also too much. So you gotta be somewhere in the middle. Not too long, not too short. So that's the reason why we don't have to wait for everybody. because those late guys, they're just like they're behind the times, they're not behaving properly. Okay, let's see Shulchan Aruch and we're done, right? Good. It says here, "En הבוצר אשר יבצוע עד שיכלה המן פי רוב העניינים." It says we said, right, that the head of the household, right, who breaks the bread, he's not allowed to break and taste until most of the people have said Amen. He's got to wait. So as we said, right, what's the reason for that? Because Amen is also part of the bracha. It's also part of the blessing. So it's like a package deal. One goes with the other. The blessing is not over until you said Amen. Okay, very good. So thanks for coming tonight. Be blessed with wealth and health and happiness. We'll see you tomorrow, B'ezrat Hashem. Laila Tov, Chazak Baruch, and Baruch Hashem. We hope for good things. Nice to see you.
Kavod Harav, thank you so much.
God bless.